With Impala Platinum, that stock closing at 189 Rand, down 4.3%. Market not really impressed with those numbers.
Evening, Bronwyn. Not at all, and it got really sold down in the closing auction. It had been having a rough day already in general line with the market. This trading update came out, no one kind of seemed to worry too much. Closing auction, 189 low of the day. I must say, looking at it and seeing as we saw one from Anglo-Plat just, 2 weeks ago, which in terms of absolute percentage numbers, Anglo-Plat was a whole lot worse. I would have expected the market to have priced it in more. Obviously, they decided that Implats was a little more resilient, and certainly indications are, I think, on the selling we saw today, and the platinum stock's probably edging lower in the days and weeks ahead.
Lots of news flow out today, but some breaking news. Shares in Gold Reef Resorts jumped nearly 10% on speculation that South African Casino and Resorts Group, Hoskin Consolidated, could be looking to that company as a takeover target. What do you make of that? I'm sure you haven't had time to look at that announcement. It's just come across the wires.
We had a set of cautionaries last week that were within 2 minutes of each other and gave us a bit of a warning in that sense. And I think it makes sense. I mean, Consolidate particularly, it's been really, really tough out there. One of the issues, I think, from 08, 09, we didn't see much merger, much acquisition out there. And the issue was simply people were too nervous. They weren't sure what the other side was carrying. They didn't want to merge. In terms of acquisition, they simply couldn't get access to cash. I think we're going to start seeing it in 2010. And it's probably the first of many. And it makes sense in terms of economics of scale, getting things together, not duplicating services and the like. In this space, I think it can be a good deal.
Dimension Data's management team is in London at the moment with a number of South African analysts and international analysts. They're obviously going through that quarterly update. What do you make of the update that we saw from that company out today? The share price down 1/3% at R9.40. They are saying that they saw a 6% rise in first quarter sales. That's led by a turnaround in their US business, surprisingly.
The US business turnaround was a surprise. Generally, Data has been bringing out some decent updates to us, particularly tough in the space that they're operating. To a fair degree, it's hardware and the like, and companies can say, well, you know, it's on a basic level, do you need a new PC or can you wait 6 months? And usually the answer is going to be, you can wait another 6 months. So that sort of thing is being delayed. But in terms of the market they operate in, Data absolutely our top pick in that space. We're expecting when things start to pick up, we're seeing that starting to happen, and it's going to be slow. But if you go back to that US example, although the US is really sort of picking along slowly, they're doing quite well in that space. They've really repositioned themselves globally. And we think if you take a 12, 24-month view, Data is definitely on our list.
And South Africa's building materials retailer Cashbuild is saying that first half sales rose 9%. That's with transactions at the till increasing by some 11%. The company, however, still says that its profit margins are under pressure, and the share closed flat at 73 Rand today.
Yeah, and if we strip out all the bits and pieces to get us from the top line to the bottom line in cents, we see with the new stores and with product inflation, they don't tell us what the inflation was, but even if we're generous and say it's half of CPI, in essence, they're going slightly backwards. The new stores, I think, drops them down to about 4%. Take inflation, they're just below 0. So not growing in any great sense, but in the period that they're looking for, which is for the 2009 period, really it is a case of if you can be going flat, and we reference that back to what Implats did compared to here, different sectors, different sizes, but if you're going flat, you're going sideways, you're kind of doing okay, and certainly that was the sense that came through out of management. They're saying it's tough out there, they're saying everywhere's performing relatively well. Botswana they weren't overly happy with, but beyond that they say things are looking good, and they're looking forward and saying, you know, we're well positioned when that growth comes back. The only concern for me, construction, that sort of space, generally a bit late cycle. I think we're going to see other opportunities before it's really time to jump into the likes of Cashbuild.
And a surprise out from Afrox, of course, the industrial gases supplier, saying that headline earnings per share would be down 40 to 50%. That's on their 2008 headline earnings per share. The stock down 5% at 21.30 Rand. Did you expect this?
Not at all. And I mean, 2008 were bad numbers. I mean, again, we would have expected some downside from it, but the 2008 was really bad. They've obviously had a really, really tough 6 months, tougher than the market expected. We can see that in the price down 5%. Certainly that was not expected coming through there. Surprised everyone. I think we're going to want to see the numbers and drill down, but certainly a lot of people didn't want to wait for that, and we're selling quite heavily today.
What's the story behind Afrox? Is there a case to buy into the company as potentially a cyclical recovery?
Short answer, absolutely there is. They're very cyclical. The economy is coming back. I think it's also to look at two things. Firstly, how strong is the recovery going to be? And I think globally, locally, it's going to be probably slower than we anticipate, not as robust, particularly coming out of the US. A lot of that US growth we saw last week was on cash for clunkers and inventory restocking and off a very low base and the like. So that's the one issue. And then the second issue again is where we're initially going to see that activity feeding through. Where's it going to happen? We saw banks, in a sense, next should, to a degree, be consumer stocks, retail stocks, and then the Afroxes.
Basil Read also out with a trading update. Good news flow on the day, Simon. It means a lot of work for you. They're saying that their headline earnings per share rose by between 15 and 35%. That's on the 2008 period. And a number of market commentators have been backing this construction stock, given its local exposure.
Absolutely. I mean, Basil Read and Avenger has been our top two picks, and if we had to pick one, we would go with Basil Read. 15 to 30%. If we remember back to even just a year and a half ago, 50% was the norm, and before that, 80 or 100 was the norm. But that's still a solid number, and it doesn't include the acquisition. That only came into effect in the last 10 days of the year. Again, to go back to the cycle part of the process, construction late cycle, I wouldn't be looking now. But if you want some construction, Basil Read's definitely the stock to look at.
From a valuation perspective, at 11.62, surprisingly, even on that positive news flow, the stock under pressure today, pretty much in line with the general market. But what are your views on the valuation?
I don't think it's overly expensive. I think the worry with Basil Read is that it's very local. What happens when the focus has been on stadiums and how trains and Eskom power plants and the like, and I think a lot of the market is saying we don't know what's coming next. We're not sure what else is out there. I sense is that Basil Read is well positioned, that there are a lot of other projects out there, that it's not going to be a case of when World Cup's over and the power plants are done, Basil Read suddenly says, oops, we've got no work. So we have the sense that a lot of people sort of haven't looked far enough down the line. The valuation, it's not cheap, certainly not much is very cheap in the market at the moment, but we wouldn't shy away from it.
The theme at the moment is that we are seeing these resource stocks on the local market coming back significantly, and that's despite the slightly weaker rand. Obviously, commodities are under pressure given the story out of China with that potential tightening of monetary policy and the moves that the Chinese central bank is making on that front. The likes of an Anglo-American now trading at 280 Rand. It's down 1 1/3% today. BHP Billiton down by a similar margin. We're trading at 225 Rand 10. Are these stocks coming back to attractive levels in your view, or have we still got some way to go, Simon?
They're getting attractive. I mean, Anglo, that 450 we've spoken about in the last 2 or so weeks, is looking further and further away. But certainly, the story, I think, as you mentioned China, also global demand. They really ran hard, and I think there was a sense of, oops, maybe we'd overdone it. How strong was that demand? And maybe how fleeting was that demand? Again, we go back to restocking. Stories that a lot of the price spike in copper was really just China restocking inventories and not so much the strong demand coming through. And what happens when these global stimulus packages, which a lot of it went into infrastructure and the like, when they are starting to work their way down, then what's the story? But that said, if we're taking between Anglo and Billiton, my preference always Billiton in that space. If you're taking the longer term, if you're looking for the next 2 to 3 years, these guys are looking at value right now. When we're talking in 2013 and we're looking back at Billiton at the low 200s, Anglo in the high 200s, we're going to be looking at them and saying, wow, those were good prices.